program contains themes of sexual abuse.
It started out as a missing teenager. Her uncle commits suicide. A couple of days later, he's supposed to talk to police. That's pretty weird. And then I think the reason why we just kept at it is because it started morphing into something more than that. Then the child abuse came out of the woodwork. And that had so many twists and turns that we could no longer imagine where the story would go next. It's hard to talk about incest on TV. I mean, it is. Even though we're not shocked by anything anymore, we've got a new lead every day. It gets more disgusting as it goes along. And you could almost lose sight of Brittney at one point in this story. She's the one that started it. Now we got a beautiful young girl. And yeah, you know what? I hate to say it, but when you are an attractive young girl, yes, people will pay more attention to you. It's unfair. But the viewership, yeah, she's really pretty. Wonder what happened to her. And then the imagination start running wild, and then you're hooked into the story. I wish it would convince somebody who might know something to say something. I'd like to think that the players in this realize that the story has been written, except that ending, and the least they could do is give us an idea of what happened to Brittney.
I actually contacted Chessie Wood and told her that the reason I needed to talk to her was about her daughter's disappearance. And because I knew that if I told her the real reason I wanted to talk to her, she probably would not have shown.
I appreciate you coming in. This has been a long time coming. I apologize that it's taken so long for us to line this up. We feel, or what we've learned potentially happened, is that there was an incident where Donnie, you and Donnie went back to the bedroom, okay, and you guys, hear me out. Okay. Hear me out. You guys went back to the bedroom, okay, you guys were back there for, okay. At some point, it's called back to the bedroom. Does any of this sound familiar at all?
No.
Okay. He's called back to the bedroom, okay? And when she gets back there, I guess it was pretty apparent that you and Donnie had been involved with one another sexually.
They arrested me in front of my two babies and put me in a van with all these people. A couple I'm starting to suspect has something to do with my daughter not being able to find her. And you've heard horror stories about what they've done at this point. I knew I was in the van with monsters. I said it then and I still believe it. And Mindy was next to me. They had me shackled, which was good for them. And Mindy was sitting right next to me. Wendy was behind me, and Dustin was next to her, and James Cooper and them was behind them. And we're in the van, and they're laughing. Okay, they just got arrested for sex crimes towards children, and they are laughing. And I remember looking at them, and I looked around the van, and I said, what is so damn funny? And Mindy looked at me as serious as she could be, and she said, God is going to take care of this. And I'll never forget, I looked around the van and I said, it looks like he already is.
Chessie Wood first came onto the radar during the course of conducting an extended forensic interview with one of the victims. During that time, Chessie was implicated as participating in sex acts with a minor. And during that time period, Donnie was actively involved as well, almost in a threesome style sex act. Based on my recollection, she did not confess outright. However, she did make some admissions that she was involved sexually with Donald Holland.
If y'all have false information, I'm scared it's going to take y'all down a false avenue.
That's
So
why
I'm trying to set you straight. That me and Donnie have never had no sexual relations whatsoever, and I've never touched any of my nieces and nephews, and never will.
And the incident that she described with Donald Holland was consistent with the description of the events that occurred with the child victim as well. Therefore, it led us as investigators to believe that she simply omitted the fact that the child was involved.
He's called back to the bedroom, okay? And when she gets back there, I guess it was pretty apparent that you and Donnie had been involved with one another sexually.
No, no. Never sexually involved, so that stops that story right there. I don't know where that comes from.
Well, moving forward, okay, in that same scenario that was then instructed to perform oral sex on you.
Oh, no way. Wherever you heard that from, you need to go. See, y'all can't tell me who says this crap. It's hard to let you finish, Eric. I have a daughter. How can I let my niece do stuff with me when I have a daughter of my own? I told everybody. I would tell you anything to help find my missing daughter and to help my son and my nephews and my nieces. Me and Donnie's never had sex. Sure enough, then sure.
She did make some statements and some comments to being sexually involved with Donald Holland, which coincided with the descriptions of some of the events that the child victim described, and therefore there was enough corroborating testimony there that led us to believe as investigators that these events actually did occur, and therefore Chessie Wood was subsequently charged criminally.
Were you and Donnie ever involved sexually at all?
No. For one, he was never attractive to me.
I knew I was going to jail. When I get there, these women over here is beating on their door, and they're telling me, I saw you on TV, and I'm gonna kill you.
Never in my wildest years did I think it was gonna be my best friend that was gonna be accused of, such things. So the night she got arrested, I was at work, and I got the phone call, I think it was from Paul, saying, what can we do? Well, when she first went to jail, she didn't have a bond because, you're dealing with sex crimes, you have to go in front of a judge. And when she got bail, I posted them and got her out as soon as possible. While we were in the process of bonding her out, I knew she was going to have an attorney. I didn't know how she was going to be able to pay for one, after having to post money for bond. But God blessed us with Michael and Eileen, and we couldn't have asked for a better defense team for her because those people worked night and day on her case.
My name's Michael McDuffie, 71 years old today. I am what is known in the legal profession as a practitioner, which is an individual lawyer that works basically alone. I have one legal assistant who's smarter than I am. And we practice in a wide area of the law, criminal defense, civil litigation, immigration, basically. I'm a trial lawyer. I'm very good at what I do.
In this particular case, when we very first met Chessie, Michael, being in the field that he's in, was highly skeptical of her innocence. And I kind of was hesitant, and I wanted to take it one step at a time with her. But talking to her and getting to know her just a little bit, I came to the conclusion that what was going on with her was absolutely horrific and deliberate. In my opinion, law enforcement, along with the district attorney's office, whichever one was controlling whichever one at the time, they were very angry with Chessie when Chessie got on TV just before her arrest, probably maybe 4 or 5 weeks before. and called them out because they weren't doing anything to look for her daughter. Where did the truth and the justice of this get lost? Because it was gone. And Chessie got arrested for that reason. She got arrested because she dared to say, "You're not doing anything to help me."
So all of this bad news was cascading out of her family tree, and she still was hoping that some of that news might actually lead to a revelation of where her daughter was. Of course, a lot of people still believe she knows. She swears she didn't. I'm not sure where I stand on that right now. Maybe that hesitation to believe her is just the news person in me, but she's been a desperate mom. I mean, there's definitely some grieving going on there. So I'm not sure. Which is, I guess, why this is still a story.
I actually remember them sharing her mugshot, and on social media, everybody actually saying that, "Oh, I see the evil in her eye." And no, that was sadness. That was despair. That was sorrow. That wasn't evil. That wasn't anything of that sort that you were talking about. She is a mother that is being accused of something while her daughter is missing.
So when the sex crimes come out, everything changed in a blink of an eye. I lost all the public. Once my family members, one by one, started getting arrested, including me, especially the day I got arrested, was horrible because it wasn't the arrest, it was the public that we lost. Class kids left us. And then we knew that the police was sure a no-go at that time. And then social media jumped on with everybody else and started bashing me. My family didn't want to look for Brittney no more. They wanted me to go to prison was their main concern.
It was going to come down to who people believed. We needed her to take a lie detector test. I think Michael, until that lie detector test was done, he still had that maybe 10% doubt.
And basically, I withheld judgment about her until she took a polygraph examination, which she volunteered to do, which impressed me enormously because people who tend to be guilty are reluctant to take polygraph examinations with a good polygrapher. And I told her going in that this was a good polygrapher and he has a reputation of being correct 99% of the time.
Chessie Wood was brought into the office by her attorney's legal assistant. I had talked to her attorney, Michael Duffy, and he had told me about the case and what she was accused of. I just sat down and started going through what the allegations were and asking her, did she do this? Was she there on that particular day when her niece said that she went into a room and had sex with her father, and then she came into the room and they all had sex together. She said that never happened, never had any sex with him, and they had never did anything with either one of them. Have no earthly idea. In polygraph, you either fail the polygraph test or you pass the polygraph test. In the case of Chessie Wood, the results were such that I would say decisively that she was innocent. I would be willing to go in a court of law anywhere and say that she was completely innocent of this.
In the state of Alabama, both sides have to agree for it to be admitted, and the DA obviously did not want it admitted into evidence, unfortunately. Of course, they would have brought it into evidence in a nanosecond if she'd have failed it.
She did a polygraph as well.
You know, oddly enough, I'm glad if that's true, that's the case. She has to live with what she knew was happening. If she didn't do anything personally, physically to a child, she still knew that there were some things going on that shouldn't be happening. At that point, I would think you would try to get your child out of that. or you would report it. Although it's not easy when it's your own family. But on such a whole scale, I mean, this was an entire family. That part I don't get.
In fact, with Wendy Holland's trial, Jesse's sister in Bay Minette, Baldwin County, Nikki Patterson, the prosecutor of that case, backdoored the polygraph examination, not the results of the polygraph examination, but the inference was that Wendy had taken the polygraph and had failed it. So it's okay when the prosecution could use it if the person who takes it fails, but they have a real problem when the person that they're accusing of a crime takes a polygraph and passes it. The same person gave both parties the polygraph.
When I was in court facing these charges, my attorney actually told me, no matter if you beat these charges or not, there's people in the public that you'll always be deemed guilty. No matter if your jury appears, 12 of them found you innocent, it's not going to change people's minds. It will change a very few, but they had it set that I was guilty, and nothing's going to change that. To this day, they still believe I'm guilty.
The only reason that Jessie gave into this is because it had been 3 years of everywhere she went, people whispering, people talking, people saying, people passing judgment, and it had been enough. And when they took me up in court and read each charge of mine, each charge was 20 to life. And all I could think of was, if I ever go behind bars, I'll never find her. Nobody's gonna look for her like me. I mean, there's people that love and care about her, but there's been times I've probably come near to death, health-wise and everything else, and I know there ain't nobody that's gonna get to that extent. In court, it don't matter if you're innocent or guilty to begin with. It's what the jury believes. And the judge can say, well, you can't, that's not submissible. That's not submissible. And before you know it, you can't even tell your story. And if you can't tell your story, you're guilty.
She was never guilty of any of this. Pleading guilty was part of a plea agreement that I entered into where all the big charges would be dropped and that a small charge she could plead guilty to would allow the district attorney to save face. Fact is, she wasn't guilty of it either, and I tried the case, and I would have won. And they knew I'd have won. But in doing so, I would have to put my client through a lot of very unfavorable publicity, and it was enough. So it was a misdemeanor, and I agreed to it.
I had to be the voice of reason with both people, telling Jessie, it's okay if you don't want to keep this fight up. Because I think she felt guilty that she was caving on any portion of it. But Michael, you need to understand this is her decision, and you haven't had to live her life for the last 3 years. It's been awful. She can't go anywhere. I can tell you of an incident in a drive-through at a fast food restaurant where they didn't want to serve her when they saw who she was. I mean, it's horrible. And I don't think people can fathom what it's been like. Michael was dying to have that trial just because sometimes the DA's office needs to be reminded that they can't step on people just because they have DA attached.
At that point in time, the prosecutor's office was inundated with cases, and this wasn't the only case going on in Mobile and Baldwin County. There were hundreds of other crimes being committed monthly. So, but this one case took up a lot of time and a lot of manpower. And so it was a lot easier rather than try all of these defendants. These individuals just needed to be processed through the system and sent away to pay their debt to society.
And my lawyer that was so steadfast about it all said, Jessie, they're offering you a deal. And I said, no way. I mean, I was still, no way. What I said was, I'm never going to take a deal that has anything to do with harming a child, because I'm not going to do that. Something I would never do, and I'm never going to plead guilty to it. He said, well, what if the charge has nothing to do with a child? And I said, what do you mean? And he said, they're offering reckless endangerment, which is the lowest of the totem pole misdemeanor, Class C misdemeanor.
Reckless endangerment is if I'm driving my car and someone is in my car and I don't make them, put on their seatbelt, that's reckless endangerment. So she was found guilty or pled guilty to a misdemeanor charge. Nothing to do with a child, nothing to do, a misdemeanor.
How do you do that? When she was arrested for sex crimes, you had no evidence against her, zero evidence, but you had all the evidence against everybody else. And the girl didn't want to testify against her. So how does she still get a charge for something that's nowhere near what you arrested her for? How do you offer a plea deal for that? Because they knew if they didn't get her with something, she would sue them, and that would bring down the whole department.
And by the way, for the record, she got no formal probation. She was given informal probation, which means she doesn't have to report to anybody. All she has to do is stay out of trouble. And she had never been in trouble. And she'd never been in trouble since. That was the other thing. Where's the criminal history that justifies the way they vilified her in the media? There was none. She really was a victim of both the judicial system, the media, and the public. She really was. And the media to this minute still can't let it go, which is pathetic.
Yeah, it's hard to shake the banner of being a child molester. And if you didn't do it, I imagine it would be maddening. That is when you have to trust that prosecutors and law enforcement have their act together, and they studied this for a long time. For me, knowing some of the law enforcement in town, this is not something you take lightly. I felt like if they were at this point in the prosecution, they had their act together. Because this is something you don't want to accuse anybody of that didn't do it. I felt like they probably had their act together. It turns out they did. But yeah, if you are led down that path and you are a person that wasn't guilty, but you were caught up in this, sort of like being on death row and being innocent, nobody's listening to me. How am I going to, unless somebody comes along that befriends me and helps me out?
People think that the media never tells a lie, and people think that law enforcement never tells a lie, and Michael will tell everyone. Law enforcement can tell you anything. They can lie to you about the color of their shirts. You can't lie to them, but they can lie to you. And people don't believe that. And people don't want to think that law enforcement would use those tactics, but they do. They're not bad people. They're doing their job in a sick situation like this, where there was enough real evidence. I cannot imagine being a detective in that and going, oh my God, this is awful. But does it rise to the level of making it okay to charge an innocent person? No. And she's not the only one that I believe is innocent in that situation either. I believe that Scott Wood was wrongfully convicted.
Randall Scott Wood was interviewed a couple of times by me and other detectives with the Baldwin County Sheriff's Office. And during the course of the initial interview with Randall Scott Wood, I remember specifically asking him, did you have sex with Holland? Because she said you did. And he nodded his head yes, while saying no. Okay, therefore, I took that again as a tacit admission that it probably did occur. His body language throughout the interview was very telling. The nonverbal cues for deception were all present. He had very close posture. He displayed grooming gestures during key questions. Again, the verbiage he used was all indicative of deception. So I knew he certainly had something to hide.
Last night, me and Scott sitting on my front porch talking about the moment he nodded to Eric Winberg. Not even 10 hours ago, we had this conversation. It is a repeated habit of Scott's. No matter what he is thinking in his head, when he's nodding at you, is to let you know he's listening. He's not agreeing with nothing you say.
Scott, for example, nobody in a million Scott, would have been involved in something like this. What's your take on that?
It's hard for me to believe, period. It's just, and it's a lot of reasons. One of the reasons that really stand out to me is he grew up with 4 sisters, and he was always so caring and nurturing of his 4 sisters. And then he raised his daughter. Her mother has a brain tumor. That floors me.
Yeah.
Out of all of them.
Without my brother, this would still be going on, okay? They'd still be molesting kids. Molesters do not stop till they're caught. That is a known fact. So Scott was always, he was in the military his whole life. He raised his daughter by himself because her mother had brain cancer and died. And so he was always like, he was the only boy. He had 4 sisters that he had to protect amongst all of us, so he was the protector. He moves in with my sister. Here's these kids, of course. He's gonna make sure they're good. And when he saw this, he was blown away and he didn't know who to share this with. So he said he called the rape hotline, the incest hotline. He said 4. He can prove 4 that he called. And nobody even cared. They would just like transfer him to another line. Okay, so he gets it done. He gets the ball rolling. Everybody's looking at Donnie. And all of a sudden, without warning, my brother Scott Wood gets arrested for the same thing. And when I was in the interrogation room, I was so stuck on Scott, I didn't even care about myself. I was stuck on Scott saying, y'all got him wrong. And they were like, well, that's your brother. Of course you're going to say that. I ain't saying that about Wendy and Mindy, and they're my sisters. Scott Wood would not hurt a child. And this is what the cops told me about Scott. Well, Miss Wood, we don't think he's, the type of man that goes to a park to target children.
Like a pedophile that goes and stakes out, public parks looking for little kids.
Yeah.
I think with Scott, this was more or less a thing of opportunity. He had the perfect storm came together. You just had all the right ingredients, and this thing just kind of blossomed. And because Scott took a totally different role than a lot of these other guys that were involved in this.
Detective Winberg said, I need to let you know something, Jesse. Your brother Scott, probably the most intelligent human being I've ever had in this room. And I said, yeah, he is a very smart man. And I said, so why did he tell on himself? If he's that intelligent, if he's the smartest person ever be in this room, why was he so stupid to tell on himself? He had to have known if he told on somebody else it was going to come back. And he said that, well, we think that he wanted the victim to himself. He did not want to share. And I was like, back again to the most intelligent person in the room. He knows when he calls the cops, she's being taken out of the home. That's what we do here to protect children. So how is he going to have her by herself? Y'all was never going to leave her with an uncle to begin with. So that didn't make sense. None of it made sense. They could not give me a good answer of why Scott Wood would tell on himself.
Scott, of course, he's a smart guy, very intelligent. I think very highly of Scott in a lot of ways. But I truly believe Scott is probably too smart for his own good. I think he got tangled up in a nasty web here, and he couldn't quite get out.
Scott Wood, this is what doesn't make sense to me. The way that he comes to law enforcement with this allegation of this abuse is happening in the house. And then all of a sudden, the allegation turns around on him that he's actually abusing.
It's my belief that he wanted exclusive access to because when he learned that Donald Holland was also having sex with Holland, he did not like that. And call it jealousy, call it some sort of sick perversion, but he did not like that and wanted all to himself. So I believe that he felt that if he reported Donnie Holland for doing this, that Donnie Holland would be taken out of the house and he would remain in the home alone, allowed to pursue his relationship with this child victim.
When the police showed up after Scott called them to Donnie and Wendy's house, they asked Scott to take the victim to her sister's house. He had to work that night. He worked night shift back then, but he agreed to do so to get her to a safety place. When he took her to her sister's house, he ran by his hotel room to grab his uniform for the company he was working at. His plan was to drop her off and go to work as normal.
Again, in an attempt to build a very strong case, I knew I had to pursue the leads that the victim had and the details that the victim had given in order to corroborate her statement. And therefore, efforts were made to travel to Saraland, which is also in Mobile County, to an area where she believed that he had taken her to a hotel for the purposes of having sex with her. And through a process of elimination, I eventually located the hotel, found the bedding, the comforter that was consistent with her description of the bedding in the room, description of the room, and actually found records where he had rented a room for approximately $56 for one night, in which he paid cash, and his name was on the ticket.
Then I hear that this hotel that he rode by with the victim was supposedly where something may have occurred, and that the police was trying to figure out what hotel this was. And I, to this day, know for a fact that they would have just called up Scott and asked him what hotel, he would have told them. He has never denied going by there to pick up a uniform.
So you were using your experience as a detective. So he gave non-verbal yeses, but did he actually say, yeah, I did it?
No, he never gave a full admission, confession, if you will, of what he did. We knew what he did based on what the victim told us, and then those statements were corroborated with some of the facts and receipts and things like that. So we knew we could build a decent case against him, but no, he never gave a solid admission.
Her daddy's death, Wendy's incarceration, and her two brothers being snatched out the home is not Donnie and Wendy's fault. It's Uncle Scott's fault. And she named him for that reason. They had no evidence. He was never on a video either. They never could place him doing wrong.
But I can tell you that being the one that blew the lid on the whole thing, in which is he is the one that did that. He's the one that called. I think that the victim was terrified that her entire family was going to disappear, and she wasn't wrong. It happened anyway, and I think there was a lot of anger about that, and she was very angry with him for telling her secret.
But I asked her straight up. I told her, I said, I want to know the truth. Don't lie to me. You know, don't sit there and try to sugarcoat anything. I said, you know, I'm the oldest of all of you. I just want to know, did Chessie mess with you? Which I already knew the answer. She said, no. Aunt Chessie, you know Aunt Chessie wouldn't touch me. And I said, what about your Uncle Scott? No, Uncle Scott saved me from them people, you know. And she said them people. She didn't say my parents. She said them people. But, yeah, so, I mean, I know truth from her mouth. Now, what the judicial system says, I have no faith in the judicial system. Haven't for years before all this happened. So, I mean, I think they got railroaded.
But yeah, the family lost. The holidays are rough, because I'm used to my house being packed out. The last holiday we had, Thanksgiving, we had 3 turkeys and a ham. That's how many people was there. And when I think about all them people, they're either dead or in prison.
So I attended the sentencing hearing of Wendy Holland, and while I was sitting in the pew, there came a point where Holland had written a letter to her mother that was to be read prior to her sentencing, and I remember the letter being read, and it was almost impossible to hold back tears as not only as a professional, but as a husband and father. You can't help but be affected by what that young lady went through and what she read. It was very disturbing.
The police told me after their arrest they were diagnosed with multiple disorders that was never diagnosed out here. One of which was being a sociopath. And okay, I'm not a doctor, I had to ask. Exactly define what a sociopath is. And this is how he explained it to me. He said, Miss Wood, you do have a table by you? And I was like, yeah, I got a table. He said, look at it. I said, okay. He said, you feel that fuzzy emotional feeling you have for that table? And I was like, no. And he said, that's how Wendy Holland feels against human beings. The same concern you have about that little wooden table in your house.
I mean, you just listen to testimony, you know, and you shake your head, and then you hear some gasps and some sighs from people in the audience, which are either family members or relatives, people who were surprised too about what they were hearing. But then, you know, when she was found guilty and the others were found guilty, you think, well, you know, maybe justice was done, but you know, it wasn't, because it's everybody was abused in some kind of a way. And if it went on for generations, I mean, who knows who else is out there?
But she condemned her mother for allowing this to go on, for allowing her to be taken advantage of, and not just be taken advantage of by her father and other men, but for her mother to actively participate as well. And it was heart-wrenching.
Well, at the trial, the witness said, the only time my mother touched me was to lead me to the monster in the shadows. And that kind of resonated throughout the courtroom. All the reporters, you know, they were jotting that down on their notepads, and they later on more than likely repeated it in their live reports or stories that they put together. Yeah.
Wendy Holland's charges was rather the most heinous of every one of them, I believe. She was charged in both counties, Baldwin County and Mobile County. Baldwin County was rape of a child under the age of 12, sodomy in the first degree, and sexual torture of a child. And when they told me this, I had to ask the police, number one, what is sodomy? I mean, if you're not a career criminal, you don't know all these terms. So he explained to me that sodomy is pretty much intercourse without the normal vagina. Anywhere else of the body would be caused. And I said, okay, what is sexual torture of a child? And he said, that is when, I wanted to know, how is that different than rape? And he said, it's when you use an object on a child sexually. The jury might have been gone 45 minutes to deliberate. They come back, find her guilty. They sentenced her to 229 years. She got the most time of any female in the history of the state of Alabama.
My thought was, oh, now this makes sense. You know, makes sense in a weird way. You know, I can see why all these people were charged, and I can see why she went missing.
I believe the problem with me finding my daughter is the police will not be truthful here. If we can get to what maybe some of the things I've done inaccurate, trying to find Brittney, and some of the things they done wrong to find Brittney and the truth, I believe if we could put it all on the table honestly, we probably could find Brittney Wood.
Every now and then, remains are found And we all immediately go, I wonder if it's her. Not that I would believe there'd be much left at this point, because if you're out in the wild, you're scattered to the wild. But maybe there's a shallow grave somewhere. Maybe there is a plastic container buried in a landfill. I mean, you always wonder, where did she go? What happened to her?
And at one point, I do remember basically being given the instructions to shut it down.
What does that do to a child? You'll always have that monster in the shadows. I mean, you never shake this.
There's a lot of parties involved here for someone not to at some point say, I've been living with this guilt as long as I can handle it, and I'm glad you're here.
Part of the whole issue is all the people that were involved are either in prison or dead. So there's a lot of opinion that you'll get her remains like it's no big deal, but the one person that's probably involved that's still alive is in prison for the rest of her life plus 200 more years, and the other one's dead that we think were directly involved in the disappearance of Brittney Wood. Well, that doesn't mean that she shouldn't be charged if she's involved. That doesn't mean that the family doesn't deserve answers. It doesn't mean that they don't need to bring her home and give her a proper burial. No closure, no place to visit. I mean, it's awful. And that, I think, is probably what's driven most of our continued involvement. Chessie is my friend now. We crossed that bridge a long time ago, mainly because I couldn't believe the way they treated her. And they did treat her horribly.
I have a few hopes making a documentary like this. I'd like to find my child. My number one goal has always been to find Brittney Wood. Number two, get justice for Brittney Wood. Once I find her, this story is not over. I know and I've accepted if I find her, that's a whole new story. Why is she here? Who did this? How did they do it? When did they do it? That's a story I'd like to take on.
We're gonna look everywhere today. I mean, everywhere, not just where they could have went, but where she could have ended up at. Y'all got it? Yes, I got a message on Facebook from one of the people in prison telling me what happened to her, that she was killed and she was put at Rice Creek, so here we are.